Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
This week at Safeway, shop the 10 for $10 produce sale. With the 10 for $10 produce sale, get items like large avocados, mangoes, green, red, orange, or yellow bell peppers, cucumbers, large lemons, or 16-ounce bags of Signature Farms baby-peeled carrots for the member price of just $1 each. Plus, select meats like Signature Farms 80% lean ground beef and Signature Select extra meaty pork loin back ribs are buy one, get one free this week. Hurry in before these deals are gone. Visit Safeway.com for more deals.
Did you know you can advertise on podcasts?
Don't act like you're not impressed.
Find out more at podvertise.com.au. That's podvertise with an s.com.au.
Ozcast.
Yeah, hello Nest family. Happy New Year to you all. And I guess we're ushering in a new decade, Drew Jones. Hello to you, my friend. We go again on the Nest for another year and technically another decade, depending on which way you look at it. Some people have differing opinions on when the decade ended and started, of course.
Well, I guess the important thing to note is that now the Nest has existed over multiple decades as we move into a new era. But yeah, I don't reckon this really hit me until maybe the 1st or 2nd of Jan, thinking about, it's poignant to look back at the last 10 years. And given the West Coast hasn't been around forever, it does actually make up a significant portion of the club's history. And geez, a lot happened and a lot of significant moments have happened in the last 10 years. So I think it's a good time to reflect. And then when you look back on it, as Eagles fans, as we always say, we are really lucky that there's a lot of highs, and with being a fan of any team, any sport, there's always a lot of lows. But for us, there's so much enjoyment, so many moments to look back on fondly.
So a premiership decade's obviously a momentous one in that sense. Another grand final was made. But I think it's undoubtedly the weirdest decade in Eagles history of the three. I mean, the 80s don't really count because we entered so late, of course. But the 90s from early on, like 1990, we finished third, and you can tell we're going to be a juggernaut team. Like, there's just no doubt about it. We make the finals in every single season in the 90s, win 2 flags. It's just unquestionable that we are going to be a team of that vein from the start of that decade. The start of the next decade, early on, Judd and Kerr come in. You can tell it's building nicely under Woosha. We make the finals in 7 of the 10 years and win a premiership, make another granny. And we're a strong team for that decade. And you can tell it's going that way from early on. This decade's been weird in the sense that, we win a wooden spoon in 2010, then bounce back unexpectedly in 2011, 2012, then dip again, Woosha goes, Simo comes in, make a grand final unexpectedly, don't really capitalise on that, then win a premiership unexpectedly, don't really capitalise on that. Sort of all over the shop for the entire decade, but still with a lot of success.
Yeah, in West Coast terms, probably a little bit up and down, which is something that we've probably never really been. But it probably reflects, extra couple of teams coming to the competition, very competitive, talent spreads out a little bit. And if you look at the influx of talent that we got at the start of the 90s, late 80s, it's understandable that we were a dominant force. And then we had that great run of putting together, a superb midfield in the start of the 2000s, and then a bit of luck with, Dean Cox and a few other players that end up being really important in our club's history. So, it's been a fascinating 10 years, that's for sure. Where do you want to start? How do we start looking back on it, do you think?
I'd like to go through our top 5 players of the decade from the off. I just think it's such a good discussion point. We'll go through a few more high moments after this, a couple of disappointments. By the way, Nest family, give us your thoughts on Twitter and so on. Take notes while we're giving our top 5 and our big moments and disappointing moments, and share with us your thoughts. We'll go through a couple of players as well that perhaps didn't quite hit the highs for a variety of reasons that we would have liked during the decade. But I think the top 5 players of the decade is a great place to start, because it's really difficult to do. Firstly, put them in order and then nail the 5, because you're leaving. I've got 5 players out of my list that could easily be in the top 5. Probably the same for you. So I think it's a good place to start. And Nest family, share with us your thoughts on Twitter. Do you want to go first, Drew, with your top 5 of the decade Eagles players from 5 to 1?
All right, you want me to go all the way through it? Okay, so
you give your number 5, I'll give my number 5. How about we do it that way? All right.
At 5, I've got Mark Lacroix and late edition, but the more I thought about it, the more I sort of came to the conclusion that he was probably in our top 3 players heading into the decade, along with Cox and Glass, probably. And he was, if he hadn't have done his ACL, he probably would have been a multiple All-Australian in those the early part of the decade.
Yep.
And when we were struggling, he was a true class player for us. And then, we've obviously the 12 goals against Essendon, we remember that so fondly.
Yeah.
But consistently such an excellent player in the forward half. There's not been that many players this decade who have been good overhead, good on the ground, could kick 50 or 60 goals, could play in the midfield if you wanted him to. He could have played at half-back.
Yeah.
Imagine him off the half-back flank these days with no one on him.
Similar to Brad Shepherd, Andrew Embley said this when we had him on, remember? There's some players you had to beat the drum for. I think Lacroix early on was a player you had to beat the drum for recognition from the East. So much so, here's a funny story, Drury. I remember when he missed out on All-Australian selection to Leon Davis might have been 2011, I think it was, which I thought was an outrageous decision. I was doing some work at SEN at the time. I remember calling and using a fake name and voice to complain about the decision. I couldn't give away who I was. I had to alter my voice a little bit and change my name because I was just so incredulous at the decision. I had to get it out there. And a couple of people spotted it and said, that was you, wasn't it? And I'm like, yep, guilty. So he was that kind of player early on that just didn't get the credit. And then later on he did off the body of his work. Fair call.
I reckon
at 5.
There was a 2-year lag period where it took to sort of him to finally get the credit he deserved. But he didn't dip below 30, 35 goals in the decade at any stage. And then he gets the reward. He had that little down period where he was struggling with form. I think he had a pretty bad hip injury for a while. And remember, the Melbourne media were going pretty hard at him. Even like Gerard Healy, who is probably more pro-West Coast than most. And Simo had to respond to a fair bit of questioning about him. He kept the faith, and then he had a really good bounce back year in 2018 and played a key role for us in the flag. So, Lacroix at 5 for me.
I've got him on my unlucky list, so he just misses out for me, and not by much, but I think maybe that dip just squeezes him out because there's so many other quality contenders. At 5, I've got Andrew Gaff. Not necessarily the most brilliant player we've had, but the body of work is just squeezes him in for mine. 2-time All-Australian, so durable, so consistent, just such an important part of the team for so long. So just that perfect number 5 player. We've had more explosive individuals, but he's just been so consistent over the entirety of the 10 years, and a couple of All-Australian Guernseys gets him in. So Andrew Gaff at 5 for me. Your number 4?
Just on Gaff, his career average with disposals is 26. And that's
a good number.
That's pretty impressive when you think about most midfielders in the comp. They wouldn't come into the AFL and start dominating from the off. The career disposal average, I know it's just one number, but it probably flatlines a little bit because of the early development time. But Gaff didn't have too much of that. I reckon they were calling him Kermit early days at West Coast because he'd always have the vest. And he had that breakout game against St Kilda, if you remember. He kicked a couple of goals from the 50-metre line. And how small his arms were. He had, I can't talk, but he was so skinny. Yeah. But we'll get to it a bit later, but we absolutely nailed that pick.
Oh, yeah.
Gaff has been he's unlucky not to have a flag, as we know. So number 4 for me is Luke Shuey, captain of the club, Norm Smith medalist, He's played basically all his football for West Coast in this period. He's been a warrior for us, 208 games throughout the decade, has battled through his share of hardships early and injury, but he's become a great member of society, as well as, a superb player for West Coast. Couldn't ask for someone better to carry the torch on after Shannon Hearn into the new decade. And I wouldn't want anyone else leading the midfield, moulding the young men at the footy club. Him and Simo, I think, have struck up, a really great working relationship. So he gets in for not just his football talent. He gets in because he's also an incredible West Coast person. So Luke Shuey for me.
I've got Shuey higher up on the list, so I'll save some thoughts on him when I get to him. At 4, I've got Shannon Hearn. So, again, similar to Gaff, there's a few players I've left out who have probably been more explosive or brilliant or have grabbed more headlines than Shannon Hearn, but two-time All-Australian, premiership captain, obviously. What I've loved about Hearn is that there was a moment just before he got those 2 All-Australian Guernseys when you started to wonder, is he fading just a little bit? Has he reached his zenith as a player? And then he completely changed that perception and went to another level and gets back-to-back All-Australian Guernseys and leads the team to a flag. He's just been so ultra consistent, such a true pro, obviously. And I love the way this season that he's changed his role and he's been happy to take almost a back seat and allowed other players like Duggan and Shepherd and Tommy Cole and Jacko Nelson to be the running players. And he's almost said, I'm going to save my legs a little bit. I'll play more of a lockdown role. I can use my kicking, but I'm not going to run as much, and just almost take a little bit off and allow those other guys to develop. So, yeah, he's just been awesome for the entire decade. So Shannon Hearn at 4 for me.
Yeah, sensational and that transitions well because he's my number 3. So, yeah, I actually went through a phase of, I don't know if I was off him. I don't know if that's the right word, but I just thought defensively he wasn't as strong as he should be. He was getting beaten in one-on-one contests. Maybe that was because we were struggling at the time. I couldn't pinpoint an exact time where I felt that way, but I think he's improved as a one-on-one player as his career's gone on. And, he come into the team as a good kick, and we always knew that, but I think he's got better as a defender. So credit to him for that. He's worked on his craft. I think he's underrated criminally in the competition. He's been one of the best rebounding defenders for the last decade, and it's being a rebounding defender or a quarterback or whatever you want to call it. It's a flash in the pan position. There's not that many guys over the last 10 years that have done it year in, year out really well. Like, think at one point Jasper Pittard has been a rebounding defender for 2 different clubs, and the guy can't kick. So that, people sometimes they'll just shove a player to half back to help them get form, to help them get easy kicks, yada yada. But Herney's done it as a great defender and also as a great rebounder for a pretty long time. So yeah, superb player.
Probably doesn't get the credit because he's so quiet. He's just not a loud talker in the media, so doesn't always get noticed. He's looked 35 from the moment he joined the club. He's just ageless, isn't he? Like, he just looked like a ready-made man with 3 kids when he signed, and he's carried on the whole way through. He's just a gem. So, yeah, happy that he's in both of our top 5. So you've got Hearn at 3. I've got Jeremy McGovern at 3. The 4-time All-Australian who hasn't played as many games as some of the others, came into the decade a little bit later, but, I mean, what an impact. 4 All-Australians. It gets lost on people sometimes, and it infuriates me when you hear, Harris Andrews or a Dylan Grimes or these guys being labelled best defender in the comp. And I'm like, don't get me wrong, on form, yes, they might be, especially when Gov's been out with injuries and so on and so forth. But he's a 4-time All-Australian who won a team a premiership last season or 2 seasons ago. Like, have you forgotten just what he does all the time and the level he's been able to play at? Alex Rance is the only one who's matched him over the decade, like, for absolute brilliance, the only one. And he's just been an unbelievable impact player at the club in a position you don't expect to have that much of an impact in, a key defensive post, launching attacks and just dominating games. A whole system that got us to a grand final in 2015 and won us a flag was built around him. That's how important and brilliant he is. So McGovern, even having played a lot less games than some others, 4-time All-Australian, he's my number 3.
Yeah, so he didn't make my top 5 due to just that fact that less games played, but obviously on my list of unluckies. But yeah, McGovern, it's not often that a player or a specific player can almost change the way that footy is played. But McGovern and Rance in part has done that.
Yeah.
It's not like they're an intercepting, attacking player that plays in defence, and that's never been a thing. I think about, before this decade, no defender has been able to have that sort of impact. Maybe Matt Scarlett, but he was more known for his defensive brilliance than his playmaking ability, take away the soccer in the grand final. So, yeah, for him to change the direction of defending, that's what he's done. Him and Rance have done that. It's like Gilchrist.
Yeah,
so all of us
completely.
You're expected to be brilliant batsmen. Now defenders are expected, can he intercept mark? Can he kick? Is he, has he got footy IQ? So, yeah, it's a big tick to him. So, yeah good call.
And he's kicking so much better than people give him credit for. So
yeah. He's a great field kick. Yeah. I've got Matthew Priddis at 2.
Right. Okay.
So, great story, Matty Priddis, as we know. I loved how Trevor Woodhouse just said, one day I just walked in and said to Whoosh, should we draft the best player in the waffle? And it ended up being a great decision for us. And he was crucial in our rise up the ladder, and especially when we lost our, the majority of that midfield. When you think about Judd and Cousins go, and then after 2011 when Kerr had his renaissance, we needed someone else to step up and fill that void. Windsor Brownlow in 2013, ultra consistent. I'm trying to pinpoint the game where it happened. He kicked that goal for us, and it was like the first time, might have been in a final. He did like the double python after kicking it, and
against North in the prelim.
Yeah, and it just felt like he was like, okay, I know that I'm elite.
Yeah.
Everyone loves me.
It's weird leaving a Brownlow medalist out, but he's on my unlucky list, so he just misses out for me. It's just that tough. We'll go through the other unlucky players in a moment, but yeah, I'm not arguing with Priddis at 2. I just don't think he faded a bit at the end of the decade, and he reached a high point very quickly, and then maybe dropped off a little bit. So he just misses out for me. But obviously, what a warrior, what a servant. So I've got Shuey at 2, 2-time best and fairest, Norm Smith medalist. I just think he's won us a lot of games, like a lot of games from midfield, and big games as well. The amount of big performances he's put in, like against Port. I remember he burst onto the scene in 2011 against Port at the Adelaide Oval, and he just played a ridiculous game. Maybe it was the old football park, and you just went, wow, this guy is like just a top-level midfielder, like elite, and he just carried that on all decade. So Shuey at 2 for me.
Did he get that winning goal from the boundary against Port, and that was like the moment where we realised the 2011 Eagles were good?
Yeah. And then it carried on, basically, made a grand final in 2015. Yeah, I think he's just been the hallmark of the midfield, like the number one player in the midfield for the decade, like without a shadow of a doubt. As good as Yo's been, as good as Gaff's been, like Shuey's been number one, as good as Priddis has been.
Yeah, there's been times where we've been playing poorly and he's been able to change the direction of the game. Like that Adelaide game where, you'll always remember it for Oscar Allen, tapping it over that guy's head in the goal square and kicking a goal late. But, dragging us back into the game, winning clearances, being tough around the ball. He's been incredible. So
I get the feeling we've both got the same number 1.
Yeah, amazing player. He's barely played fully fit for 10 years and he's kicked basically 600 goals. So as far as key forwards go, the only one that stands beside him, I think, is Franklin.
Yeah, over the decade.
Durability is probably superior to Franklin's. He hasn't got the same raw athleticism and talent. But when Josh Kennedy was around the ball, there was a 5 or 6 year period where he was quick enough and agile enough to run defenders down, intercept kicks in the back line. You know, this is not just a key forward. He could crumb. He could do it all. He could take pack marks, which didn't do. And, yeah, regardless of how well the team has been performing, he's always kicked goals. Doesn't matter what the delivery has been like or the midfield. Amazing player. Again, like a few of our other superstars over the years, he hasn't been big in the media, doesn't like doing press conferences or interviews, but great human being as well. Incredible player.
7-time leading goal kicker for the Eagles over the journey. I mean, that says it all. And, you know, a couple of Coleman medals too, and big games in big finals as well, including the grand final where he kicks 3 and kicks that snap from the boundary when it's up for grabs in the last quarter, of course, which is just such an important moment in the granny that probably doesn't get recognised as much because there were so many other poignant moments on that day. But yeah, I mean, I think a moment for me, like probably halfway through the decade, because I grew up as such a big Peter Sumich fan, like my first ever favourite Eagle, just loved him so much, a full forward in a dominant team when you're young, that will happen. And like halfway through the decade, I've always had Sumich in my, you know, full forward in my best ever Eagles team, like not even thinking about other players. Then halfway through you go, who's the full forward now? Like, has Kennedy got him? And then you just go, nah, Sumich full forward, Kennedy can play centre half forward, because he could play that role as well. So I'll get both in the team that way. But you actually started to think about it halfway through the decade. And then by the end of it, I mean, he's the club's leading goal kicker of all time. So, yeah, undisputed number one player of the decade, Josh Kennedy, for both of us. And I don't think many Eagles fans will disagree with that. So my top 5 is Kennedy 1, Shuey 2, McGovern 3, Hearn 4, Gaff 5, and Drewy's gone Kennedy 1, Priddis 2, Hearn 3, Shuey, Lacroix. So Hearn, Shuey, Kennedy, we both have. You've got Priddis and Lacroix in there, and I've got Gaff and McGovern instead. So a number of unlucky players, Drewy. Nick Natanui, Elliot Yeo, 2-time All-Australian, Brad Shepherd, what a brilliant player over the decade. And then I've got Priddis and Lacroix as unlucky players who made your top 5.
Yeah, I thought like Gaff was in the top 5. He got shoved out at the end. I just went with Lacroix. Yeah, we've had a lot of good players. Nick Nat, I thought about. I mean, he's probably in it if he doesn't do his knee a couple of times. I mean, that's always the big asterisk with Nick Nat, isn't it? That who knows where he'd be and what he would have achieved, considering he could be an All-Australian this season after going through what he did. So, yeah, it's a hell of a list. I was just thinking about Kennedy, the bags of goals that he's kicked. Like it did. I wouldn't be able to tell you what season or how we were going as a team, but you can remember, again, like just tearing the Bulldogs apart at Subiaco, kicking 11. I think was it Mother's Day? He kicked 10 or 11 against the Giants, and it was just every time he went forward, hit up Kennedy, bang, mark, and like it was 11 goals won. Like everything just goes through. Yeah, amazing player. So look, I've put a bit of thought into the stuff over the decade, like the great moments. And there's some stuff on the Nest Patreon I'm still working through at the moment. I just wanted to throw something at you just to start us off, because I think it plays a pivotal role in our decade. So we finished last in 2010. Think it can go either way from there. If you think about where we're at as a club, and then also the circumstances of the draft. So in a normal season, we would have had pick 1, and then it ends up being probably pick 17 and yada, yada. We also had a priority pick because we finished, I think we only won 4 games. So we would have had pick 1, 17 and 18 in a normal season. But Gold Coast come in and they have 8 of the first 13 picks in the draft. So it was a bad time to be bad. We missed out on draft capital. So we end up with pick 1, 26 and 29. Sorry, 4, 26, 29. Yeah. And Gold Coast completely butcher a bunch of their picks in that top part of the draft. David Swallow was always going to go 1. We end up with Andrew Gaff at 4, which was a great pick. Yeah.
Well, I'm taking Andrew Gaff over David Swallow. No offence to him.
And
by a long way.
And over Sam Day. So those 3 picks made sense. You get Swallow, who's probably like, they're thinking future captain inside midfielder, Harley Bennell, the crazy talented forward/mid, and then Sam Day, you get your key pillar for the next 12 years. Those picks make sense, but as it turns out, Gaff's the best pick. And then we somehow get Darling at 26, who's kicked 450 goals for the decade. Yeah. And we get Scott Lycett, who ends up being our premiership ruckman. So we absolutely nail our 3 picks. And then we get Jeremy McGovern in the rookie draft. So we start the decade with immaculate drafting, and that sets us up for the whole decade. So I think that when you look back at all the things that have happened in the last 10 years, that could be one of the most important moments.
Very well said. And Jack Darling's an unlucky player, like another one who doesn't grab as many headlines as he should, and has dips in form and has games where you want him to really dominate and he doesn't, or he has like a half of a game where he just goes completely unnoticed and then will kick a 3 1/4 and gets himself back into a game. He's that kind of player, but his body of work over the journey is simply fantastic. The amount of goals he's kicked, and won All-Australian Guernsey, and would have had another one if not for that injury, that bad ankle injury in 2019, I'm pretty sure. So he has been absolutely fantastic over the journey, Jack Darling, another one who's unlucky to miss it, and you nailed it. It's good drafting, and we need to give him credit for the decade that he's had as well. So, yeah, well set up in that sense. And, you didn't quite know where the decade was going, as I said early on. And let's be honest, a couple of legends like Dean Cox pull us through those early years with the Matt Priddis, while those young players that you mentioned are developing. Like Cox has an unbelievable 2011 season. When he's lost Judd and Kerr, who have now gone, or Kerr's fading, he does it on his own in so many games. And then those other guys start to come through.
Yeah, the 2011 season was one out of the box, wasn't it? Like, really enjoyable as a fan, because when you come in with no expectations to then rise up the ladder that quickly was really enjoyable to see, Shuey take that really big step as a gun midfielder, and various other players have career renaissances in many ways. And then 2012, probably we dipped a little bit. We weren't as consistent as we thought we should have been. The main thing I remember from 2012 was Nick Nat taking that mark against North Melbourne, that big clunk, and kicking a goal. Might have even been after the siren to win us a game.
Yeah.
But what else stands out to you in the decade as a really big moment? There's some obvious ones, but...
Yeah. I mean, look, obviously the grand final win and making the granny in 2015, I mean, they're just obvious. We don't need to go through the ins and outs of those moments again, because we've done so many times and people know them so vividly. The Priddis Brownlow is an enormous moment. So you discussed him in your top 5, but that was it was such a great moment because it was so unexpected. Firstly, Matt winning that night, but also Matt Priddis winning a Brownlow. It was just such a great story. And it's always great when someone from your club wins one. And we all remember when Juddy won it and Cuz won it, and the near misses of Turley and Matera and Kerr over the years. And then, the unheralded rookie listed inside midfielder who doesn't get much attention just nabs Charlie, just so good from an Eagles point of view. So that was a great moment.
Yeah, I wrote about this on the Patreon. So, and one thing I've just thought about it a bit with Priddis, and I wrote about it, was that when he was playing for Subiaco, and he would have been doing extras, working harder than everyone, do you think there were many times where he was doing extra laps or extra running, or he's in the gym on his own, where he thought, is this all worth it? Am I dedicating my time to the right part of my life? This is 2004 or whatever, when he's been overlooked 4 times in a row. I'm just so happy for him. If he went through those low moments, which he probably did, what the end result and the reward is so great, and the Brownlow medal just puts a bow on it. Regardless of whether he had won that or not, he'd still be an Eagles great.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's watching him become a great player was such a pleasure as an Eagles fan. And then for him to win the Brownlow, I mean, he only polled in 2 of the first 7 games. And he ends up polling, I think he only misses about 3 more games in terms of polling for the rest of the season. So he came home really strong. We didn't have a great year in 2013. We only won probably 9 games or something. yeah, great win, superb win.
The other high moment I've got is just the call to appoint Adam Simpson as coach. Like, just such a big call to make after so many years of Worsfold's and Malthouse success, people so intrinsically linked to the club. You know, we've only made one real error when it comes to coaching, and that was Ken Judge. That didn't quite work out. John Todd was only there for a year. The club, it was such early days that you can't really look at it too forensically. But we have to go outside of our Eagles back room, if you like, where Wisher had come through. And to make that call where you can't be even close to 100% sure that it's going to work out. You're taking someone from another club. He's got the runs on the board. He seems like he can do it, but you just don't know. And for it to work out as spectacularly as it has, not just with the success, but the way in which he conducts himself, it's so West Coast through and through. Like, just classy, right? Just so classy, the way in which he operates and speaks. He's just been just fantastic to have him as your head coach. You're just so proud that he's your boss.
Yeah, and it was Lee Tudor, Sumich, and then one other that got down to the last sort of four. And I don't know if you remember, but Kim Hagdorn reported that Sumich had the job. And I think it was sort of expected that he was going to get it. He'd sort of done his time. He'd been assistant at Freo and West Coast. And yeah, they went for someone outside the family, as you said, which was, I guess, a big call, but it was the right one. And Simo's got we've all seen, the Friends family flags and, all that sort of stuff. And some of that is PR, but he does care about not just winning games of football, but also, making young 18-year-olds into great people who can enter society and contribute positively. And I remember a friend of mine telling me this story about how it was like team photo day and Mitch Brown had like the wrong shorts. And Simo was like, everyone shut up, like calm down. Mitch, go find the right shorts. Like, don't help him. Like, he wouldn't let, the equipment people do it for him. It was like, we got to think for ourselves. Like, go find the shorts. Like, you're a man. You're a grown man. Go sort yourself out. And like that, I think he's been important in that way. And he's a modern day coach, and it's worked really well.
I mean, there's a moment when he was under pressure, and I think for good reason. After that 2015 flag, the team became a bit slow and predictable. Like, there just wasn't enough spark in the team. That wasn't all his fault. He just didn't necessarily have the cattle. But I remember there being big pressure and, the articles being written in the West Australian, should we be reviewing this man as the coach of the Eagles? And, that irked him for good reason. He'd made a grand final a couple of years earlier, but that's the job. It's highly pressurizing, and the team looked as if it was fading. And I think the frustrating part for fans was he wasn't giving young players a go. It was like, give these kids a go. We need some young enthusiasm and spark in the team. And he was holding off a little bit, and he was having a couple of run-ins with the media, about it. But he maybe just didn't have the young cattle. And then he goes to the draft and he brings in a Liam Ryan, and he starts to inject Willie Rioli into the side a bit more. And he knows it. He knows that that's the problem. But he doesn't bag his own players. He just waits for the right time to do it, does do it, and we win a flag. So he's just so aware, and he's just not that stubborn that he'll stick to his guns and fight back against the media who are calling for him to do something, or the fans who are calling for him to do something, like some coaches do, this I know more kind of thing. Like, he's aware, he just picks the right moment to make those calls. And yeah, he was not on the brink, but he was under big pressure for a period of time and got it right ultimately. So yeah, that was a poignant moment in the decade too.
Yeah, it's interesting that 2015 we make the grand final, but unexpectedly, I reckon if you play that game 10 times, we probably win 5 out of the 10. We kicked inaccurately, bit shell-shocked early, and then when we made our charge, the darling moment probably finished us off. And then 2016, I looked back at the season, we didn't do a lot wrong that year. We finished 5th, but we won like 15 or 16 games. That would normally get you into the top 4. It's almost minor premier in 2020. and then just run into this Bulldogs team of destiny. Like, they absolutely flogged us. Like, we were never in that game. We got smashed.
Yeah.
But, I mean, nothing could have prepared us for an 8th place team who was, in that sort of mood and that sort of form. They also get that week off where they get like 5 players back from injury. And then the next week we would have played Hawthorn, the ageing Hawthorn team. I reckon we win that game. Like, that's our payback. So who knows what could happen. But
well, that's a segue into like the disappointing moments of the decade. I've just got those 2 finals, the 2016 final and the 2020 final against the Pies, are the 2 moments that stand out as just, when you lose a home final, it really hurts. It really hurts, especially one you expect to win when you finish 5th up against the 8th side. Like, Eagles shouldn't be losing those games. But as you said, 2016, we run into a red-hot Bulldog. So in the end, they win it. You say, fine, fair play. 2020, we should have won it ultimately, but just didn't come together for us. And we missed some opportunities in 2019. We dropped that game against Hawthorn, which cost us a top 4 spot. We've discussed all of this, but those 2 games stand out as the disappointing matches that you really felt sick in your stomach, losing home finals that you should win on paper.
So I actually think that the loss to Hawthorn, that's our worst moment of the decade. That cost us top 4.
Yeah.
We're in the flag window. We're defending champs. But, everyone knows around footy that this West Coast side right now is capable of winning flags. So that game for me was our worst moment, pound for pound.
Yeah. That
cost us a real chance, a real shot at the flag. So disappointing for that to happen against a Hawthorn team, which were shocking. That was a bad side.
I'll tie in then Willie Rioli with that as like the worst moment of the decade, like his ban, which I'm not saying it's not justified, but just a really sad story for a player who was developing so well. And it impacted the players against Geelong. You cannot doubt that. Like, they can say all they like, no, we put it beside us and we rocked up to play. Like, no. It affected them enormously.
Yeah, there were a few things that just didn't quite go away in 2019. And the Willie stuff was a shame. So one of the better moments I probably think of the decade is also that draft where we get Oscar.
Yeah.
And then Liam Ryan. I think Oscar Allen's going to be a top 10 AFL player, maybe better.
Fair call.
So, and because he's already had moments where you're like, this guy he gets it. Like, he's good in big moments. He can do almost everything. Like, remember that mark he took against Hawthorn in the wet?
Yeah.
Running back with the fly, like, he got smashed in the middle of the ground. Like, he opens up his entire body to anything. Who knows? It could have been McAvoy or, Segler or whatever running back. And he pivotal moments, he's there. And that's like what you look for in a great player. So he was a steal, absolute steal. We hope Brander's going to turn a corner and be a great player for us. And Ryan, obviously, he's arguably the best small forward in the competition now. And we get him in the 20s. And then, however, which way it goes, the fact that we didn't get Tim Kelly and we spend all that draft capital, that's going to be a pivotal moment in our club's history, one way or the other.
I've watched some games back in recent times. I don't know why. I've just like late at night, just chilling at home, and I've just whacked on some games from the season, like just to look back at, just watch a quarter here and there. Tim Kelly's season wasn't as bad as people think. Like, it just wasn't. Expectations are so ridiculously high, and yes, he fell short of them. I'm not saying he didn't, but he actually played some really big games. That's why he polled well in the Brownlow. But people expect him to be like Chris Judd because of all the hype and what we gave up and what he did at Geelong. He hasn't quite delivered, but he hasn't been as far off as people think. He's played some really big games. So there's reason to be enthused about what he'll do next season. Just a great moment for me in line with the premiership season is, we were tipped for bottom 4 wooden spoon that year going into 2018. And I just loved how calm the club was. And I think one of the reasons for it is, everyone said, how's our midfield going to cope without Mitchell and Priddis? And Priddis was fading. He'd already been squeezed out. Simo knew that he'd fallen off the cliff and it was a difficult time to negotiate through all that. Mitchell was also a luxury player. Like, I think it was great that we brought him in. He had such an impact as an assistant coach. But how often did he attend centre squares? Like, not often. He quite often played loose man in defence, which is a position you can actually do without, like that quarterback role. You don't need it, right? You just push that man into the midfield or make him accountable for someone. So it was so easy to negotiate that. And we had so many A-graders to get us through it. And then other players step up like Darling, Shepherd, Yo, they all go to a new level. And we win a flag. And for the club to remain so calm through all of that, amid all that talk, it was just, again, West Coast, such a classy operation.
Yeah, so our midfield was better because
definitely
they went out of the side. But Mitchell played a big role in, he worked with Jack Redden every day for, a couple of years, and he becomes a better player. And he's one of the ones who benefited from him not being at the club or not being in the midfield. He got more time there. Also, Yo was playing half back. So he went to full-time midfielder in 2018 and had a sensational season. So, yeah, as good as Priddis and Mitchell were, them going out of the midfield made us a better team ultimately. And Mitchell as an assistant probably offered and gave us more than as a player. I was at the 2017 elimination final working for Fox Sports News. I'm sure we've talked about it a few times, but that goes down as a great moment in Eagles history.
Yeah,
not because it ends up playing a huge role in us winning a flag or anything like that, but it encapsulates, Shuey, the clutch gene, and Jeddah had a really great, a big night. Kennedy kicks a couple of crucial goals for us, and also it's a great memory. Like Drew Petrie was one of my favourite AFL players outside of West Coast.
Yeah.
Like everyone sort of loves him. And we got to experience this season with Petrie at the club, and he played well that night. He's now an important part of the club he's played a role with the women's team. He even played a couple of games for our reserves team last year. So he's been a really good addition to the footy club. And just that, we always get that moment, that the Shuey goal and then the Mackenzie slide post, which is also one of my favourite Eagles moments. They all happen within 5 minutes of each other.
So that segues beautifully into another category we've got for this chat, the player that just could have delivered more, didn't quite realise their potential over the decade, one that you had high hopes for. So Mackenzie's on the list for me because it's just injury that cruelled him. Like he is, I think, the most unfortunately underrated player because he just didn't play enough because of injuries. But at his best, he's a best and fairest. And then he does that in that Port game, which allows us to discuss him now. Like without that moment, we even probably forget about him and don't discuss him, right? Because he's just, he just faded into the background a little bit. But he had so much ability and he was an early draft pick and delivered on that and was such a leader through some dark times. And it's just a shame that his body didn't hold up. And you look at the images of the 2018 Premiership and everyone talks about Shepherd, Gaff, Natanui for good reason. You see Eric Mackenzie floating around. And Simo did mention him a few times. He's like, you got to remember him. Don't forget him. He was a big player over the journey. And if he stayed fit, he might have played in this game as well. So, yeah, he's the one that comes to mind more than any other for, the player that you think could have delivered a lot more, but through no fault of his own.
Mackenzie plays a pivotal role in some ways with the emergence of Jeremy McGovern because he does his ACL. When Mitch Brown and Eric Mackenzie got injured early in 2015, as a result, Schofield and McGovern played key back that season, and they become. Schofield ends up doing a great role for us on grand final day in 2018. Maybe that wouldn't have happened if he hadn't have got that chance to become a full-time key defender. So these sliding doors moments that end up being crucial in our history. But Mackenzie won a best and fairest, and he probably should have been All-Australian at least once or twice. He was a great defender for us. It's a good call. I've been trying to think about someone who's been unlucky, and I don't know if this is the perfect example, but I wonder what could have been for Mark Nikoski if he hadn't have done his hamstring in that pre-season game against Adelaide.
Yep.
45 goals in 2011, and he never got back to that player again after he I think he tore it off the bone. It was a really bad hamstring. He was a pretty big player for us in 2011. He found that role at half forward, and he ends up. He's still an important player at the club. He does like mental health stuff and preparation with the players. But we could have had a few more good years out of Nico had he not had that injury.
Fair call. It's been just a great decade and great to discuss it. And I'm sure people are sitting there with thoughts and moments that they want to bring up. So please do on Twitter. But I think that pretty much does us, Drew, for a decade that has delivered so much for Eagles fans.
Will there be a more important singular kick in Eagles history again, outside of Dom?
Then what?
Well,
will there be one? Will there be one? Is that the question?
There'll be a moment again in Eagles history where there's a kick where so much is riding on it.
No.
Like there's big kicks, but this is like
there couldn't be
in front of goal. So,
I mean, there couldn't be. There couldn't be a kick to win a grand final. Like unless it's the only time it could be is if the siren's actually gone in a grand final. That's the only time it could be. That's like you look. It's still so fresh in our minds, but it's going to go down as the kick, for us. So I think about it every day. I reckon every day.
I reckon every day.
I mean, I watch. I turn on Eagles games, like the beauty of the Foxtel library. I just go through and turn on old ones, and I'll flick on the 2018 grand final from time to time. And just love watching moments like the Ryan hit on Maynard. Just love watching that. I start from when we're 5 goals down. Like I just start the game there and just watch us get back into it. And I don't even have to watch that moment anymore. I've seen it so many times. I love watching the other parts of it, but that's
what's the second most important goal in that game, do you reckon? Is it Shuey before half time? Is it really stupid little grubber? Accidental goal?
No, I think it's Rioli's lucky one before quarters. Like we're down by 5 goals and we need something. I think if we go into the quarter time break having not kicked one, I know we kicked 2 pretty quickly, but the Rioli one gets us back into it. I think if we go into quarter time without kicking one, we don't win the game. I think they were able to settle then. And they're able to say, okay, this is what we need to do to sort of keep them at bay. That gets us back into it. That cools us mentally. So as much as it was scrappy, I'd say the Rioli shin goal that just levels us.
Well, it was getting to a point where it was like going to become too much.
Yeah.
If it got to 6 or 7, then it was probably over. So it was massive for an accidental shin.
A premiership decade, Drewy. A premiership decade. So ones to revel in.
Yeah, Garby, absolutely. Thanks for taking a trip down memory lane. Let's do it again soon.
It's been good fun. Jump on the Nest on Twitter and share with us your thoughts. We'd love to hear it. Get involved in the Patreon. There's some great work there, and we always say it's the price of a coffee per month. Like it's literally nothing. You won't notice it. So get involved if you haven't signed up yet. But Drewy's written a great piece on the decade, which is free for all Nest viewers as well. And rate, review, subscribe, tell your friends on all your podcast networks as well. And thanks for enjoying the decade that has been for the West Coast Eagles with us.
This week at Safeway, shop the 10 for $10 produce sale. With the 10 for $10 produce sale, get items like large avocados, mangoes, green, red, orange, or yellow bell peppers, cucumbers, large lemons, or 16-ounce bags of Signature Farms baby peeled carrots for the member price of just $1 each. Plus, select meats like Signature Farms 80% lean ground beef and Signature Select extra meaty pork loin back ribs are buy one, get one free this week. Hurry in before these deals are gone. Visit Safeway.com for more deals.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.